So today I want to go over this absolute positioning again, or positioning in general in CSS, because some design you want to work with, the way the element are placed here, you can't be using what the normal positioning of that element on the page to work with it. It will never give you what you're expecting it to give you. For example, now I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
So, for example, now look at this design here. There's no way you want to work on this design and you'll be using all these display to make this element to behave like this. It will not work because of the way element used to be placed on top of each other on the page. Look at this design now. So as you can see the card is placed on other element on this page. So how do you do something like this? You need positioning property in CSS before you can do anything like that. So, and when is positioning property useful? This positioning property is useful anytime the layout of the page is not following the normal flow that you used to work with there. Then you have to use positioning property to lay out your element properly the way you want it to be. And we have different values that you can use for this positioning there, starting with this static, which is the default. So every element on the page are positioned as a static by default. So you don't need to mention static when you are working with any element because by default, all elements on the page are positioned as a static. So which means the way you lay it out in your HTML code, that's the same way you are going to see it on the page. So if you type the p tag first, followed by the h1, then when you get to the screen or on the browser there, you are going to see the p tag, then followed by the h1. But that's not what you want to do every time. There's some element you want to place somewhere on the page, which is not even related to where you type it on inside the HTML file. So there's a lot of element that you need to work with, or that you need to have their layout or their structure change, not because of the way you arrange it in the HTML, but because of the way it's supposed to be placed on the screen. And there's no way you can type it like that from the HTML. So you still need to type your element line by line. But just because you type them line by line doesn't mean that on the page too they are going to appear like that. That's how they are going to appear by default, but you need to shift some element to different area on the page because the designs that you are working on require you to kind of put the stuff at that particular location there. And there is a lot of application for positioning of different positions that we have there on the page. For example, here if you look at this side, can you see the side? If you look at this side here, you see that the thing is not scrolling like all. What is scrolling is the content at the middle. Again, to look at this button down here or this box down here. As I'm scrolling, that box is still the box is still here. It's not scrolling like all. So this is application of positioning here. So it's positioning that they are using to do this, and the same thing that you see by this side that is not moving at all. So how do you to do something like this on the page, or how do you place element anywhere you want on the page by using positioning? So I'm going to be talking about different values that you can use for positioning and the time you'll be using them. So this one is only fixed, but we're going to talk more about it when we get to that particular value. If you spell the code that is generating the or the CSS they are applying on this element, you are going to see that they are applying positioning property and they are giving it a particular value which is fixed. But that's the only one that will give you this kind of functionality, and that's the reason why you need to know about this positioning so that you too you can use something like this later on. Can you see on this line? Yes. So can you see that using positioning property and the value that I mentioned is what they are using. How do I know? Because each one of these positioning property or the value, they have the time you use them or they have the way they behave. So and it's always like that. You can't change it to do another thing. Anytime you're dealing with position of fix, it's always the same across the site. So they don't do difference. So the difference there is where you are placing their but they behave the same way. So on the page as I'm scrolling here, this box is still here, and at the same time, the one by this side is still maintaining its original location here and it's not moving at all. So, how do you to do something like this? You need to know about positioning in CSS. And when you are dealing with positioning, these are different values that you can supply to it there. So we have these different values that you can use for positioning in the CSS there. But apart from this positioning here, there is other thing that you need to know, which is the offset. So let me remove all this one. We don't need them. And let me type out the offset because offset goes along with this particular property, which is the positioning property. So here we have offsets, and I mentioned it yesterday, but I'm going to list out everything so that we have the offset properties, and this offset property has this. So we have the left, we have the right, which is what you can use to shift the element from one side to the other side. So whatever side you mention, it's going to shift it to the opposite of that side. So we have the left. It means we want to move this element from left towards the right hand side. Then we have the right offset too. We have the top, and we have the bottom, and lastly we have insert. So the insert is just a way of you mentioning these four properties at the same time. So that's what the insert is there for. So insert can help you to set these four property at the same time. So not that you start mentioning each one of them. So if the same value that you want to apply to all of them, you can actually use this insert to apply the value at once instead of you calling these four properties. So this is these are the offset property that you can use with some of these positioning value here. So all this offset only works with this here, this four. It doesn't work with static because when you say something is static, it means it doesn't move at all. It will always maintain its original position and you place it there. But you can actually offset any of these four property here, like this relative, absolute, fixed, and the sticky that is down here. So let's start with each one of them. I told you the first one on that list is always the default one. So any element that you are dealing with, they are always positioned as a static by default, but you can change it and you position it with anything that you want there. So in order for us to see what is going on, so inside this box, inside this container here, I'm going to create another one for test. So I'll call it text so that we can see it in action. Or let me move what's going on. So let me move it here. So I'm going to create a div. This is what I want to create. So class text like this. And here, so I have a div. This recording app that is doing this nonsense. So inside the div, I'm going to have the content that I want to show there, which is always going to be lorem. Let us put the 10 domain text there like this. So inside this text from the CSS, I'm going to select it. So that's why I gave it that class to give it a background of orange, red like this, orange, red, and it should have the width. I don't want it to have too much of width so that we can use it. This one should just be like 30% of its parent. So I hope you can see my screen. Hello.
Yes,
Yes,
I
I
can
can
see
see
your
your
screen
screen.
too.
All right. So let's start with the first positioning value there, which is the static, which is always the default one. So this one is just as if you are not typing it at all, because that is what's it there. So just for you to see what is going on with it. So what's going on here? So tests. save the code so that we yeah. So this is a text box. This is a box that we want to work with. So let's give it a padding so that we can have uh and border radius, which is not needed, but we need to make sure that this our card is looking nice too. Not just any card. What's going on? What did I type? What did this thing type? Border radius. What's wrong with the VS code? Coming not much. Let me close some of this app that I'm not using. Because now it's slowing down my. And it's because this thing is 32 bits, it's not 64. That's what this recording app used to do. Okay. All right, so let's start. We have this position. This is the property, but the value is the major thing there because the value you are supplying to will determine how it's going to behave. And just like what I've been saying there, the default one is static. And what is static? It means this element is going to be placed the way you type it from the HTML. So wherever you place it in the HTML, that's the same place you are going to see it at the page on the page. But as you can see, nothing is changing because by default all elements are static. So if you arrange the elements first in the HTML code and other content follows it, that's the same way it's going to appear on the screen. But this is not the reason we're here. We want to talk about the other one, which is this relative absolute fix here, and this sticky that you can read more about it here. So these are different values that you can supply, but I will explain the relative, the absolute, and the fix um, value for the position there. So and once you use relative, this one by default it behaves like static too. But the difference between this relative and static is that you can offset it. So what is this offset? You can use this offset property to move your element from one side to the other side. So if you want to move the left side of the element, you just use the left offset. If you want to move from the right side, then you use the right. If you want to move from the top, you use the top offset property. If you want to move from the bottom side, you use the bottom offset property. And if you want to do it from all the side there, you can use the insert. So insert is useful when you want to give the left, right, top, bottom the same value. So which means you want to shift all the side at once with the same value, you can use insert instead of calling this for property on different line. Just call the insert and it's going to do it for you on one line. So by default, this positioning of relative works like static. So which means by default it's not going to move from its original location, but you can actually shift it around by using this offset property. But just because you are shifting it around doesn't mean it will give the space for the other element. It doesn't give the space, but it can move around. For example, here if I use top and I give it maybe like 200 pixels here. So what I'm saying here is that from the original location or from the original top of this element, I want to shift it down by the value that we are using here. So this is the original location of the top. So this is the top of the box. So from this top here of this box, I want to offset it downward. Because if you use top, it means it's moving towards the opposite side, which is going to be down. If you use bottom, then it will shift it up. If you use positive value, there, but if you use negative, it will go in the opposite that or the side that you mentioned it. So and what really this thing is saying here is that this 200 now, what you're saying is from this top here, you want to shift this element downward by this particular value. So you want to offset it from its original top side downward, because when you say top, it's coming down, but if you use negative top, then it will shift it up to the side that you mentioned it. So here now, going back to the page, save this code, you see that the box now is going to be shifted downward. Can you see now? So from the top, it will calculate 200 pixels. So which means from here now, from this place, from this line to this place is 200 pixels. So from the top the original location of the element, you are shifting it down by this particular value that is supplied to this offset property. Don't forget, all this offset property doesn't work with static. So if I change this relative now to static, you see that nothing will happen because they don't work with static. Element will maintain its original location. As you can see, it's not working at all. So before you can start using your offset property, make sure that you are not using it with positioning of the static. It only works with this other positioning value there. So in order for you to be able to offset your element from one side to the other one, you need to position it apart from this static. Then you can now use the offset to shift it around anywhere you want it to go. So here now, we can replace this static with relative, and you see that it's going to shift the element from top to the bottom side by these 200 pixels that I use as a value. And here, if I change it to 20, you see that it's only shifted by 20 pixels, not 200 again. As you can see, it's only shifting it by um, 20 pixels. So if I use 100, it will only shift it by 100 pixels. So what if you want it to go up instead of it coming down? So what you can do here is to use negative value. So whatever side you mention, if you use negative value, it will close the space. But if you use positive value, it will give a space. So if I use negative, it means it's going towards the top because we use negative value. So from this top, it will calculate 100 pixels upward instead of it coming down. So when you use negative, it will move towards the side that you mentioned. But if you use positive, it will move away from that side. I hope you are here.
I'm with you, sir.
Okay. So this is how this relative work. It work with the offset to shift it around. But the problem with this relative is that it doesn't remove its original, like the elements will still maintain its original location. No other element, you can see that space is still there. Even though you've shift the element out of that place, like the element has been shifted out of that place, that space is still there. It will always maintain that space because that's what it's using to calculate its offset. So when you are dealing with this box, its offset will be calculated based on the box position, where it's being positioned by default. So this is where the element is being positioned by default. Let me use another color. So clear, change to yellow, and circle the box. So this is the original location of the box. So when you are not dealing with any of these offset property, it's going to calculate the value based on this original location here, and no other element on the page will take up that space. It will still maintain that particular space because that's what it's using to calculate the offset there. So and if you want this thing to move from left to right, so this is the left of the box. So from here now, if you want it to go towards the right, just mention left and you give it the value, and it will start from the left. Not that it will start from here, it will start from left. The counting of the value will start from this left, and it will keep moving towards the right when you give it a positive value. But if you give it a negative value, then from this side it will keep moving in the direction of the offset that you mentioned there. So if you want this thing now to move forward from the left to the right, what we just need to do here is to use the offset, this left offset property here, and you give it whatever value you want. So if I use 100 pixels, so from its original location here of the left, it's going to go towards the right. As you can see, it's going towards the right because we are using the positive value. But if you use negative value, you see that it will go in the opposite direction there, which is, as you can see, it's going by 100 pixels. So which means it left, this left here, it will go to this side by 100 pixels, not the right. It's not calculating on the right because we mentioned left. So it will be using the left to calculate the value. But now if I change it to right, it means from here now, that's what it's going to be using. So from here, this is right now. So from here, it's going to calculate minus 100 pixels there because we actually use negative value. So it will move towards the side, which is the right. It will calculate 100 here, but towards that right because we are using negative value. But assuming we're using positive value, so this from the right now, it will move towards this side by 100 pixels. Don't forget, when you use positive value, it will go to the opposite side. But if you mention negative value, then it will go to the side of the offsets that you mentioned there. So if I save this one now, you see that the box will keep going towards the right. Based on is using this right though. This don't use the left because that is not using right. And since we mentioned right, means the right of the box will be shifted by 100 pixels from its original location. So this is the original location of the right, then it's going to shift it by 100 pixels. So which means the right is here before and it has been shifted to this side by this particular value, which is 100. It's not moving the left. What is moving now is the right of the box. And that's the same way it works for the other side that you want to use as a offset there. So if you use bottom too instead of use bottom instead of the other one, then it's going to do the same thing. But now it will be calculating the same based on the bottom of the box. And the calculation is going to start from its original location and it will move based on the value you supply there, whether it is negative value or positive value. As you can see now, it's using the bottom. So from here, this line here to here is the minus 100 pixels. And if I remove the minus and change it to positive or the number here, you see that from the bottom side, it will go up by 100 px here. So this is positioning of relative. The problem with relative is that it doesn't allow any other content to take over that space. It will be using its original location to calculate its movement there like that. So this is how this one work. I hope you are still here.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
We
So
still with you, sir.
yeah, so you can use the offset to move this element around. But this offset is not that really useful when you are dealing with relative. We normally use it when we are dealing with this other type of position here, which is this absolute and fixed. Because this one now, even if you shift it around, that location will still be there. So no other element will take up that space. But where the thing is really, really useful is when you are dealing with this absolute or the fixed. Because this one now, they don't depend on the original location again. They depend on what I'll be going to be explaining there because the way this absolute works, it's quite different from the way the relative works there. So when you're dealing with relative, it will maintain its original location by default. But if you use the offset property, it's going to be shifted by that value that you are giving to that offset, but it will still maintain its original location. And at the same time, it will be using its original position to calculate the offset. So if the element is here and you mention right, so this is the right of it, so it will calculate the right of this box from here. So when you show left there, it's going to calculate from here. This is the top, then it's going to calculate from here and it will shift it up or downward based on whether you are using negative or positive value. The same thing too, when you mention the bottom, this is where it's going to start the counting, but can either go up or down based on whether the value is positive or negative value there. So if you use minus 100, it will come down because you are using bottom. But if you use 100, then it will go up because it will always go to the opposite side when you use a positive value. And this is the original location. No other element will take up this space. But what if you want this space to be removed? So anytime you position this element, you don't want it to maintain this position again. You want it to be removed and the element can now be placed anywhere you want on the page. That's where absolute comes in. So absolute is useful when you want to remove element from its original location and whatever space that element is occupying before, that space too will be removed and you can now place the element anywhere you want on the page. That's where you'll be using absolute, and that's what you always use a lot of time when you need to move your element to some area that you cannot do that stuff from the HTML itself. Like you cannot do that kind of arrangement from the HTML. So you have to use absolute positioning to place the element anywhere you want or any odd place on the page there or wherever you want to put your element. So instead of it to be relative now, what we are going to do is to change it to absolute. And by default, or just like what I mentioned here now, first thing that will happen is that the element will be removed from its original location. So which means the element will not know that, okay, this is where it was being typed in the HTML. Once you use absolute, the space that this element is occupying there will be removed. So if I save this code, you see that the element will be removed. Now, can you see? Other element has taken up that space. Once you position any element as absolute, the original location or where that element used to be from your HTML, that element will be removed from that location. So whatever other content that is, beside that element, they will take up that space. So it's not less for you now to move the element around anywhere you want it to be. But there is a problem with this absolute, because the absolute doesn't know where it's coming from again. It's not like the relative. When you use relative will still use its original location. No other element will take over that space. Because if you look at it now, as you can see, it always maintain that original location, but you can offset it to any other side that you want. But once you use absolute, the first thing that the browser will do is that it will remove that element from that place. And once the element has been removed from that place, so it doesn't know where it's coming from again, there is always be using that box to calculate its offset. So it doesn't use its original location to calculate offset, because it doesn't have the power to take up that space again. As you can see on the screen, the space has been taken over by the other content that comes after it there. And since the space has been taken by other content, so when you use your offset here, it doesn't use this original position here to calculate the offset. So what is that going to be using? What is going to do is to look for a parent that is positioned apart from static. Please listen. Anytime you position any element as absolute and you want to use the offset property, what is going to do there, or what that element is going to do, is that it will look for its immediate parent that is positioned apart from static. So any one of these parent that is positioned apart from static, that's what is going to be using to calculate its offset. So which means, say top, it will use that parent top to calculate. When you say bottom, it will use the bottom parent to calculate. That one, if the parent is positioned, no. If the parent is positioned apart from static, that's when it's going to do that. But if none of its parent is positioned, then it will be using the body to do the calculation. Once you have an element that you position as absolute, just make sure that one of its parent is positioned. If none of its parent is positioned, then it's going to use body to calculate the offset. For example, here now, if I use top of 0, it will never use this box green here to calculate this offset here. It will be using the body. But why is it using body? Can you see? It's going up. It's not using its original position to calculate, because normally this is where the top is, which is 0. This is left of 0. This is right of 0. And this is bottom of 0. But now it's not using it. Why is it not using it? It's because the element doesn't have access to this position again. So this is the top of 0. This is the right of 0, assuming it is relative. And this is left of 0. And this is bottom of 0. But now the element is not using it. It's not using this top of 0. It's now using the body 0 to calculate its own offset. Why is it using it? It's because of what I just mentioned there not long ago. Anytime you position any element as a absolute, it will look for its parent that is positioned apart from static. That means one of its parents somewhere must be positioned apart from static. And when that parent is positioned apart from static, then it will be using that parent or layout to calculate its offset. But since none of its parent is positioned here, that's why you see that it's using the body to do the calculation here. So anytime you position any element as absolute and none of its parents is positioned apart from static, it will go to the body directly to calculate offset. So here too, if I change this bottom to 0, it will never use its original location or its parent. Why? Because for the element, it has been removed from that location, and again its parent is not positioned. So since its parent is not positioned here, as you can see, it's now using the body to calculate the offset. If you mention left too, it will be using the left of the body to calculate the offset for the left. As you can see, it's going to the left of the stock. And if I use right too, then it's going to go to the right of the body. But most of the time, when you are using absolutes, you want it to use the parent. Please mute your mic. So most of the time, when you are dealing with absolutes, you want the element to be positioned relative to its parent. That means wherever the parent or layout is, that's what is going to use to calculate its offset. But how do you make sure that is using the parent layout to calculate its offset? It means somewhere in the parent, you are positioning that parent apart from static. It can be relative, it can be absolute too, it can be fixed, or it can be sticky, depending on what that parent is doing. But most of the time, since the parent is not moving at all, what you always use is relative. So once you position the parent apart from static now, then all this offset, instead of it to be using body to calculate it, it will now be using its parent now. So if I save this in now, you see that the way it's calculating its value is now different. Can you see? The right is now based on its parent. Once you position the parent apart from static, it will be using that parent to calculate its offset. But if none of its parent is positioned, then it will use the body, because that element that you position as absolute doesn't know where it's coming from again. And since it doesn't know where it's coming from, that's to go to its parent to borrow the layout. So, and whatever parent that is positioned, that is the only parent it will use. And if none of them is positioned, then it will go directly to the body. And that's the reason why you see that it's sticking to the right of the body, not its parent. So if you want it to stick to the parent, then the parent has to be positioned apart from static. It can be relative, can be absolute, and it can be fixed or sticky. As long as it is not static, it will be using its parent to calculate or to move. So if the parent moves to the left, it will follow the parent to the left. The parent moves to the right, it will follow the parent to the right based on the offset that you are using from the child. So since we are using right of 0, so it will stick to the right of the parent. If it is the top, now that I use, you see that it will stick to the top of its parent, not to the body again, because the parent has been positioned apart from static. Once the parent has been positioned apart from static, the offset of the child that is positioned as absolute will be based on that parent. So there, like that. I hope you are following. So you can use any of these offset, it doesn't need to be one of them that you're using. You can use all of them together. So I want this thing to stick to the top, and on the right too, I want it to be stick to the right and top. So which means it's going to be by this top right hand of the parent here. As you can see, the top is 0, the right too is 0. And if I want it to be by this corner here, then what I just need to use is going to be this bottom instead of the top, because it's going to stick to the bottom, because the bottom is the 0. So it's going to go there, and on the right too, it's going to stick to the side. And you can use this thing now to place element anywhere you want in its parent by just using the offset properly. But before it works, or before you start using its parent to do this offset, you must make sure that the parent is positioned apart from static. But if you know that the parent too is not moving at all, just use relative, because I don't want this thing to start moving anywhere. So that's why I'm using relative here. But if it's something that needs to move too, then you use the appropriate positioning property that you want, or the value there. So we have this element that we want to move around in its parent. And don't forget, the element was actually here before. This is a box where the element is located from the HTML. But with the help of this positioning property here, we are able to remove the element from its original location, and we take it to another place inside that container. But don't forget, it doesn't use its parent to calculate the offset. The only time it will use its parent to calculate this offset is when the parent is positioned apart from static. Any of the parent, because it can belong to multiple parent there. So it will look for any one of them that is close to it that is positioned. And the one that is close to it there, it will use its offset or the layout to calculate the movement for its offset. That one, if that parent is positioned apart from static. That's why I'm repeating this thing because that's the major thing there. If you just use position of absolute and none of its parent is position as relative or any other positioning property or value there apart from static, it will not work. You just see that it's moving to the side that you don't want it to go because the parent is not positioned. And since the parent is not positioned, you see that it will be using the body now. But this is not where we want it to be. We want it to be at the bottom corner, the right bottom corner of the parent, not the right bottom corner of the body that is showing right now. So this is not what I want. I want it to be relative to its parent there. And in order for this thing to work, you need to make sure that the parent or any of its immediate parents is being positioned somewhere, like you are using positioning property somewhere there, and it's going to go to the side wherever you want it to be. So this is absolute positioning there. So absolute positioning, you can use it to move elements to anywhere on the screen. And the first thing you need to know is that the element is not going to maintain its original location again. The way you arrange it in the HTML, that's not the same place it's going to be once you position it as a absolute. So it will be removed, and that space that is occupying there will be given to other content that is inside that parent. So, but if it is relative, relative will still maintain that space, even though you've shift the element out of that way, it will still maintain that original location there. So that space, other element will not occupy it, and that is why we don't use relative to kind of move element around because that space will still be there and it's useless. So, and since you want to remove the space and you want to move the element to another place there, you always use absolute. But the problem with absolute is that it doesn't know how to calculate its offset based on its original location because that space has been removed. And since the space has been removed, so you need to give it another location that is going to use to calculate the offset. And if you don't give it parent position in there, like if the parent of the element that is positioned as absolute is not being positioned apart from static, it will be using the body to calculate the offset because it doesn't know where it's coming from again. And since it doesn't know where it's coming from again, you need to give the int. And the int, the way of doing it is by giving its immediate parent as like positioning its immediate parent apart from the static, which is the default one. Even if you don't type any positioning, it's always static by default. And static doesn't work with offset property. So since static doesn't work with offset property, it will not use its parent that is positioning as static. So you need to use other positioning value before it can start using that parent to calculate the offset. And for this absolute, if you scroll, it will go along with the content. But at some time, you want to do something like this and you don't want that element to leave the position where you place it. So anywhere you place the element, you always want it to maintain that same location there. Hey, rain or network. So anywhere you place this
Yeah,
thing,
because
you always want it to maintain the original location. Just like what I showed you on this side. Let me go back to that side. You see that the box or this arrow down here is not moving at all. This box down here is not moving. The content by this left side too is not moving. So if I scroll down or if you scroll up, you see that they are still at that same place. So in order for you to do something like this, that's where this positioning of fix comes in. Just like the name fix, it always been placed on wherever you put it on the page. So, and again, this one doesn't use its parent to calculate offset. It always use the screen. When you're dealing with absolute, when its parent is positioned apart from static, it will use that parent to calculate offset. But when you're dealing with fix, this one doesn't care about its parent. It's always using the screen. Even if its parent is positioned, it doesn't care about it because it's not depending on the parent. It's always depending on the screen that you're working with. So that's a fix. So once we change this one now to fix, the element now, the way it's going to calculate its offset will always be based on the screen. So which means it will be using the screen, not its parent. So if I save this one now, you see that it will stick to the bottom part of the page. It will always stick. I did not say the body, oh, it will stick to the bottom part of the page. It's using the page that you're working with. So look at the browser. This is where this thing stop. That's why I stick to this side. If I increase this one, you see that to change. It's always using the board. It's always using the screen that you're working with, not the. So it doesn't work with the body, it work with the screen. And if you scroll, it will always maintain that original location. It doesn't move. So let me shift it up, or let me add more content to the page so that you can see. Let me go inside this main. So at the end of this main, let's have a paragraph, and inside this one, let's have like lorem 200 to just generate some random 200 text there, so that we can have this scrolling stuff.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Are you hearing me at all? You know, your network because I was not even hearing anything before. When I put this fix into body, I was just shouting hello, sir, hello, sir.
I couldn't
Nothing
hear
else
you because
coming.
rain is the rain. But let me go over the stuff again.
Uh,
I said no. I talked about
yeah,
absolute,
just
right? I talked about absolute. So and I said that
yes.
for
Just
fix,
fix.
I said for fix, this one it behave like absolute too. But the difference between them is that one, this one doesn't move anywhere you place it. When you use absolute, this one is depending on its parent, if the parent is positioned apart from static. So the parent is positioned apart from static, is going to use that parent to calculate the offset. And anytime you move from that parent, the content too will go along with that parent. So it doesn't stay at that place. As you are moving up or moving down, the content too is going to move along with your scroll there. But what if you don't want the content to move? You want it to stay at that particular location. That's where the fix comes in. So fix, wherever you place it, that's where it's going to be. And again, it doesn't use its parent to calculate the offset. It always using the screen. So whatever the screen you have available there, whatever offset you are using there to, it will be mapped to the screen that you have there. So when you say bottom, it's talking about the bottom of the screen, the available screen that you have for the browser. So when you say left, it's talking about the available space you have on the browser there. When you mention right, it's talking about the right of the browser. When you say top, it's talking about the top. It doesn't care about its parent. Whether the parent is position or is not parent position, it doesn't use parent to calculate its offset. It always use the screen. And wherever you place it, that's where it is going to be. It doesn't move at all. So if I use 00 now, as you can see, it has gone to the bottom part of the screen because it's using the screen to calculate the offset. And if I don't want it to stick to the bottom side, I just want it to go to that side a little bit. So I can just do like 1 rem, which is this 16 pixels. And for this one too, 1 rem. But wherever you place it with this fix, that's where it's always going to be. It will never go or it will never scroll along with your content. So if I scroll up or scroll down, it will always stay at that position. So wherever you place it, that is same place you always see it. Whether you scroll up or you don't scroll up or the thing can scroll or the page can scroll, it can't scroll, it will always maintain that same location. That is fixed, which is like what this site is using here. So this site is using this fix to place this content by this side, and other content is scrolling, but the side one is not scrolling at all. The same thing too, the box that is placed at this bottom right here, this arrow that you can click to move to the top here, is not scrolling at all. It's always at this side. And what they are using here is the positioning of a fix. So once you position any element as fixed and you offset it to anywhere you want to put it there, it will always maintain that location. It will never leave that side. So whether you scroll up or you don't scroll up, you scroll right or you don't scroll right, or you scroll to left, it doesn't care. It will always stay at that position. And these are the major positioning property or the value that you'll be using there. So you're going to be using relative, you'll be using absolute, you'll be using fixed. the most of the that's absolute. You always use it a lot. And as you can see on this YouTube, you see that some content are placed on top of this thing here, and there's another one that here. You can use absolute positioning to do this thing here, or you can use fix if you know that this thing will never scroll at all. So fix and absolute, wherever you type them from the HTML, that's not where they are going to be. They will be removed from that location. Absolute will be using its parent to calculate the offset if that parent is positioned apart from static. But for the fix, it always using the screen or the available space you have on the browser to calculate the offset. And whenever you place it, that's where it's going to be. It doesn't screw with the other content. It will always maintain that location wherever it is there. Um, and that's how this positioning property works. So this is where we're stopping. So this network is not working the way it's supposed to again because of this rain. So I will stop the video here, and once this thing is uploaded to the YouTube there, I will share the link to the group, and you can go there to watch anytime that you need it. Tomorrow there, we're going to apply what we learned today by working on two designs that use different kinds of positioning property that we have there. So we're going to work on different design that put all this in practice. So when do you use absolute? When do you use fixed? When do you use relative? So we're going to work on them tomorrow. So that will be all. I need to stop the video.